There is no genocide by the government of Sudan. However, what you have, including members of the current administration in Washington, have been brainwashed by this thing about genocide, 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 which they've gone so disoriented by this propaganda that they no longer have a grasp on reality.
So the issue of Darfur is just a matter of too much lies. And when you say lies day and night, people become to believe that it is the situation, which is not really true. So my fellow Americans, those who are die-hard Save Darfur coalition people, come to Sudan and see for yourself.
Let's step back from the whole thing about the present day and look at the recent years of creation of this as a claim that there's genocide in Darfur.
This doesn't translate to any reality. And these are concocted scenarios to make people brainwashed so that they think that there is something wrong going on.
Oftentimes, what is portrayed as truth by the majority of popular opinion is wrong. Such is the case with Sudan. Since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, the country stands more united than ever. The people have spoken. After decades of war, they have had enough. The questions confronting Sudan today are not confined to that nation itself. Rather, Sudan must be seen as an actor on the stage of current history, and it is that stage which determines the identity of the nation. We can use the issue of Sudan as a case in point, as a catalyst for understanding the causes of the current economic crisis and for implementing the necessary solutions to end it.
I bring you greetings from LaRouche, our international movement which is represented here today.
A team of LaRouche PAC representatives participated in an international conference held by the General Union of Sudanese Students on uniting against the politicization of justice in Khartoum, Sudan from April 5th to 7th. This included a journey to Darfur to witness the internally displaced people's camps, presentations by President Omar al-Bashir, Vice President Ali Taha, cabinet members, and extensive interaction with Sudanese student population from all over the country. The trip also included discussions with government officials in Khartoum and in Darfur, including dialogue with the people of Darfur and a tour of modern agriculture and infrastructural development being built within Sudan. It should be clear to the cognizant that what most Americans are bombarded with regarding the shrieks of genocide in the Darfur region today, in the form of an amalgamation of Hollywood actors, neoconservative right-wing Christians, and ignorant college students, is not only an outright lie, but would lead to the destruction of the nation of Sudan and the rest of Africa. If you want to talk about genocide, get your facts straight. The real issue with the destabilization of the Darfur region is not inherent to the nation of Sudan itself, but comes directly from the role that the British Empire has historically played and continues to play throughout the African continent still today. Rather than helping to develop the population of Sudan and Africa, the British have consistently manipulated and controlled the region, halting economic development and accelerating tribal conflict.
The Sudan was what they call a condominium. It was ruled by both Egypt and United Kingdom. And we went through all the atrocities, the mistreatment, all the things of colonialism.
To understand this historically, people should shut their mouths until they go back to 1898 and go back to the time where Lord Kitchener took over Sudan.
We've all heard of the great heydays of the British Empire, holding over half the lands of the world under its imperial control, from India to Africa to China and the West Indies. Since then, though countries in Africa and Asia have become so-called independent, the incessant grip of the British Empire has never ceased. Since the mid-1800s, the British had their eye on control of Sudan and Egypt due to their strategic location as the bridgeway between the African continent, the Middle East, and Asia. Whoever controlled this region controlled world trade. From then on, the British began to bring Sudan into their colonial chokehold. However, in 1880, a movement emerged in opposition to the British attempts to subjugate Sudan. The Sudanese would not go down without a fight. Muhammad Ahmed, known as the Mahdi, or the Divinely Guided One, consolidated a movement comprised of groupings from all across Sudan, from Dongola, from the Bukhara region, and from Darfur. In 1885, Sudanese forces led by the Mahdi marched on Khartoum, intent on forcing British Governor General Charles Chinese Gordon out. The British had sent a relief force, led by Lord Garnet Joseph Wolseley, to Khartoum to buttress the city and keep the Mahdi from invading. The forces split up. One force was sent overland across the Bayuda Desert towards Khartoum. However, upon reaching Abu Talai, they were stopped in their tracks as Beja warriors, allied with the Mahdi, broke through the British line, halting the advance. The second column was sent ahead by river. They arrived in Khartoum on January 28th. Too late. Days earlier, the Mahdi forces had descended upon the poorly defended city by way of the Nile. They overwhelmed the scanty troops, marched on the garrison, and beheaded Charles Gordon, parading his head on a stick around the city and delivering it to the Mahdi. The British never forgave Sudan for this incident. After 13 years of independence in the region, British troops led by General Lord Kitchener returned to capture the capital at the Battle of Omdurman, killing over 10,000 Sudanese soldiers. Lord Kitchener ordered the tomb of the Mahdi ransacked, his bones thrown into the Nile and his skull brought personally before him to be destroyed. Then, further down the White Nile, Kitchener marched on Fashoda, confronting the assembled troops of French General Marchand. Both armies stood opposite one another. Not one of them budged. Both claimed the region as their own. Finally, after a 7-month standstill, tense with the expectation of conflict, the Fashoda agreements were reached, dividing the region of Central Africa into British and French spheres of influence. Sudan was put back under British imperial control. The region was divided with absolutely no regard for ethnicity, culture, or natural borders. The arbitrary borders ensured continued destabilization within the region. The British had a playground in which to pit rebel and tribal groupings against one another. Even today, ethnic groups in Chad are the same as the ones found in Darfur. The British knew that primitive existence of sectors of the Sudanese population, a backwardness upon which the British depended for control, would wither and die away under the impulse of new ideas and with the rise of a new generation. In order to maintain their grasp on the people in Sudan, the British moved to instigate conflict in the region, to keep the population backwards and barbaric. So, in 1922, they enacted a policy separating the north and the south of Sudan. They passed the Passport Permits Ordinance prohibiting any Sudanese natives from the north to move or work in the south, or vice versa, without a proper passport or permits. The official policy became to induce hostilities between the north and the south, running them as separate territories. They reduced the number of people involved in government by reinforcing divisions of so-called tribes and gave monetary and other rewards to tribal chiefs to keep them in power. The much broader policy was the control of Africa from Cape Town to Cairo and control of the Nile River basin. As a direct result of this policy, 1 year before Sudan's formal independence from the British, the first Sudanese civil war broke out between the northern government in Khartoum and the southern rebels. One of the most terrible wars in African history, killing an estimated 2 million people. Since then, non-stop warfare and destabilization has dominated the Horn of Africa.
Sudan was the first country in Africa to be independent on the 1st of January 1956. Because of the complications of the British by then, they isolated North from the South. In the name of these are indigenous African people and these are Arabs.
So you have a complication of elements around there which are all British intelligence operated. The last time I was in Sudan, I saw a bevy of this stuff. British intelligence all over the way.
Today, the British role in Sudan goes directly back to 1989, when the British intelligence created and directed organization known as the Muslim Brotherhood seized control of the country. Hassan al-Turabi, a prominent leader of the organization, reorganized the Sudan branch of the Muslim Brotherhood and eventually established the National Islamic Front in order to promote the creation of a radical Islamist state. In 1989, this organization led a military coup d'etat, reorganizing the government and purging members of the army, police, and administration. General Omar al-Bashir emerged as the compromised head of Sudan. During this time, there was no end to the North-South conflict in sight. However, a decade later, a shift occurred as al-Bashir officially broke from the National Islamic Front, throwing Turabi into prison. With this reorganization, the Bashir government initiated talks with the South, culminating in the 2005 Comprehensive Peace Agreements, one of the most crucial steps in Sudan's history. As a direct attack against the steps taken by the Bashir government's unification, conflict re-emerged once more in early 2003 with rebel groupings such as the Justice and Equality Movement led by Tarabi protege Khalil Ibrahim, attacking government infrastructure and law enforcement under the guise of liberation movements. In order to prevent the sabotage of the comprehensive peace agreements, the government utilized counterinsurgency methods.
What had happened is that the previous shake-up in the government of Sudan had been involved the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is essentially a British intelligence operation, or British intelligence-controlled operation from the top down. And what had happened in this process is that people who had been associated with the Muslim Brotherhood broke with the Muslim Brotherhood and became Sudan nationalists.
On March 4, 2009, the International Criminal Court put out a warrant for the arrest of Sudanese President al-Bashir. This can only be seen in the light of the continued British destabilization efforts in Sudan. Take a look at the ICC. The creators of the ICC are Lord Mark Malloch Brown, Secretary General of the British government's Foreign and Commonwealth Office for Asia and Africa and the United Nations, and George Soros, a worldwide dope pusher and speculator whose career began as a Jew working for the Nazi government. The creation of the ICC dates back to Bertrand Russell's founding of the World Federalist Movement in 1947, in order to carry out his plans for a one-world government. In 1995, the World Federalist Movement, now funded by Soros, created the Coalition for the International Criminal Court, which finally established the ICC. All of the nations targeted are part of Africa, and all, through these actions, would be brought back under colonial control and would lose their national sovereignty. Just look at the conditions of life of the people in the Darfur region. The majority of the population relies on farming and grazing for their livelihood. Water is scarce with unstable yearly rainfall, and the majority of the land area is a vast desert with yearly desertification of up to 6 kilometers per year. In southern Sudan, illiteracy rates have skyrocketed, optimistically estimated at 80%. The fight over scarce natural resources and land and harsh living conditions represents the greatest problems for Sudan.
If you zoomed into Africa from outer space and looked at this landmass, it's the second biggest in the world after Asia, figuring bordered on the Ural Mountains. It's completely underpopulated as far as what its great potential is. It has fewer than 1 billion people. Less than India, less than China, and it's a whole huge continent. And there it is with special features. It's got the biggest desert, extent of desert in the world, far bigger than Arabia, the famous Sahara Desert. It has the second biggest volume of river flow in the world after the Amazon, the Great Congo. It has the longest river in the world, the Nile River. It has these features, as every continent does. That's not a constraint, it's a challenge, it's a great treasure, and yet it's been completely suppressed as far as any of the normal defining characteristics of modern technology.
So to solve the crisis in Sudan, we must understand that we are not looking to manage the internal politics of a nation or to accelerate tribalism or arbitrary rifts. We are looking to increase the standard of living and the quality of life of the people by developing the land area and educating the citizenry. That should be the explicit mission for any solution to the current crisis.
Now this is the real story. The story is that with the collapse of the international financial and economic system, the British Empire system, the globalization system, now they want to demolish anything which has anything to do with the sovereignty of nation states.
The continued conflict and destabilization in the Darfur region today has overshadowed one of the greatest infrastructure projects constructed in the whole of Africa, the Merowe Dam project. Designed for irrigation with a 1.24 billion cubic meter reservoir to serve 4 million people in the surrounding area. This dam has the potential to produce 1,250 megawatts of electricity per hour and, in conjunction with the Al Ghazira storage irrigation project, will irrigate over 2 million hectares of land. Nearby lies the nation's largest airport, potentially a major hub for international flights connecting Europe and the Middle East to Africa, and several state-of-the-art medical facilities and housing for the welfare of the displaced population. Already, the government has launched a resettlement plan relocating 70,000 inhabitants into modern villages with paved roads, electricity, running water, sewage systems, modern educational systems, and healthcare centers, and turning hundreds of thousands of acres into arable land. Sudan is one of the most fertile and agriculturally rich nations in Africa, with over 1/3 of its land area capable of agricultural development.
Just divert a certain amount of the Congo flow northward. You can do that through the tributary, the Ubangi River, and then it can meet up with the Chari River that goes into the former Chad Lake. It's a Chad Basin area. That this creates a whole development potential in sub-Saharan Africa, which is right now part of the epicenter of this created conflict called the Darfur crisis.
With this potential harness, Sudan has the capability to become a breadbasket for all of Africa and even the Middle East, ending starvation completely.
In our project of this 5 years development plan, we are planning to connect the entire Sudan with the West, including what we call Chad, including Central African Republic, Congo. We have now penetrated a big route going to Eritrea and Ethiopia already. Uganda and us, we are planning on a railroad connection. And sooner, if this government continues and wins the elections next year, we will completely concentrate on developing our land. You know, we are limited in technology, but we will use whoever who is friendly to us to help us achieve the development. You are right, we need to prevent the existence of famines. We don't expect, to continue having people hungry and unhealthy in Sudan when we have oil, when we have the largest quantity of waters in the world, when we have a fertile land. All these things are only, we are to this stage because of the 50 years of war. Instead of buying pumps, we are buying tanks, we are going, sometimes these are necessary because of the incursion by enemies, but the enemies want to keep us down. We will defy them, we will put aside this fighting among ourselves by all means. That's what we're doing. And concentrate on development, because only through development will we eradicate all the scourges of hunger, of disease, of illiteracy. These are things we have in our mind to work on.
So you look at Sudan and you see a young nation with a vast potential and ability to play a leading role in today's world. That potential has been wasted and not allowed to develop. The case of Sudan, however, cannot be taken in and of itself. Rather, Sudan is exemplary of what is wrong with the current world financial system we are living under, the system which is presently in an accelerating collapse. Today, leading governments must use the fight for the nation of Sudan and its potential to destroy the British Empire and to implement instead a system of sovereign nations acting together to develop the world.
But our interest in Africa, our interest in parts of the world is to not just to make friends. That's a kind of a sloppy term. Our function as the United States, as we are a republic, our interest in the world is not to have any empires. We hate empires. We hate the British Empire, not only because of the crimes it commits and still commits, but we don't like empires. We believe in nation states. We believe in representative government, constitutional government, nation states. We believe in nation-state building. We don't believe in globalization. We believe in nation-state building. Globalization is an empire. We don't believe in empires. And therefore, our policy should be consistently to develop, wherever we have the opportunity, to assist in developing nation-state building and dealing with problems such as food shortages, disease control, these kinds of things, practical measures. And the only time we go to war is when we have to defend something like that. And we fight only when that's necessary and only as far as that's necessary. We don't get involved with these imperial policies of this type.